Dr. Sara Vakhshouri, founder and president of SVB Energy International, sitting in Washington, the president of the United States getting up at the lectern, giving out about the CEO of Chevron, I think it was. But nonetheless, the friction growing between the consumer, obviously the US is a big producer too, but nonetheless, the efforts by the Biden administration to get the oil producers, if you like, on side. We're still more than 1 million barrels a day and US production below pre-COVID levels. What's that we sort of go into the end of this year? Where is the lasting consequence, do you think, of this friction between policymakers in the US in particular and oil producers, whether they be countries or companies?
Thank you, Sean. Actually, I'm now sitting in Dubai.
Oh my God, I can just about see you then.
Yeah. So this is actually a very good question. So if you want to kind of analyze what is happening in the US, I would like to divide the short term versus long term. So if you look at Biden's policy in the short term, we see a lot of mess inside the United States. We have massive withdrawal from strategic petroleum reserves, with many argue that it's not a very wise idea to deplete the resources to lowest historically just for manipulating the market. The gasoline prices are not necessarily going down as in the same volume of crude prices, because obviously US has a shortage of refinery capacity. But if you look at it in the long term, something interesting that I like to note is that the Inflation Reduction Act that President Biden administration has somehow worked and passed, and they're working, is a largest decarbonization strategy or plan that a country that wants to implement. And if that succeeds, in a long term, like in a decade, US is going to have a lot of surplus. I would say even sooner than that, within 5 years, US is going to have a lot of surplus of production. So it's going to look into be more of an exporter of energy, or a crucial exporter. At least I think that's where both sides of the aisle in US are kind of agreeing.
Do you think it's fair, Sarah, that the general narrative, which you sort of end the year with, which is the oil industry sort of moaning that they're not investing, even though they've got huge profits, because they've no policy certainty going forward? Is that a fair argument against the policymakers?
It is, especially that we have a president that his campaign was somehow against investment in fossil fuel. But something that Aldo mentioned is really important. OPEC trying to create that stability of prices. When we have a stable prices, that's crucial for investors. So price stability is not just important and crucial for OPEC producers, but is important for investors. So if investors kind of in that market that, again, as described by Aldo, is very uncertain every day, the factors are changing, and it's very hard to predict. Having that certainty over price is very important for investors.
We started out the year where everybody seemed to be, the sentiment of the markets was all moving together, the financial markets, the commodity markets, the sentiment of the oil producers, oil consumers. OPEC Plus was increasing 400,000 barrels a day. The price was recovering, but nonetheless, nothing too worthy in terms of the burden of that. And then, of course, Ukraine happened, and other dominoes, and we end the year with a lot more fraction between these different parties. I'm wondering, within the context of the oil producers, the OPEC Plus, the cohesion within OPEC Plus, Iran, we started the year, we were going to have a deal. Now we end the year, the deal is dead. All of this fracture, is there no consequence? Should we be, writing our Santa Claus lists and wishing for a nice toy, that there's no consequence to this fracture that seems to be just getting worse and worse? I'm just wondering your thoughts. Does it suddenly stop and we reach a plateau, or does the fracture continue to erode at itself? Your thoughts as we go to the end of the year from where we started.
And there's so many things, Sean, that I don't know how to organize my thoughts on that. But just if I want to classify.
Well, I don't hear anybody saying consequence on this call, which I thought would be more to the forefront. You know, the fact that there's no Iran deal, is there a consequence? Iran apparently is on the doorstep of developing a nuclear weapon, weeks away, we were told. So is there no consequence to Washington and Riyadh sort of throwing fairly acidy barbs at each other? I mean, that's where I'm really getting at. And obviously in both of those instances, there's critical energy supplies that the world needs. Yeah.
So I think, and contrary to Jorge, I think there are consequences. Talking about Iran, first of all, Iran is not the Iran of 2 months ago. There are massive turmoil in Iran. People, expats people inside Iran, young people are being killed. I mean, it's not anymore issue of nuclear deal in Iran. We are talking about massive riots and protests in Iran, out of control of government. It's just, you never know if the government is going to collapse soon or not. So it's not anymore the issue of it's going to be a deal or not, but would Iranian government does some erratic, like some crazy reaction to distract the people, or the moment the protests started in Iran, we start seeing Houthis issuing threats to ships, transportation of goods and shipments to energy facilities in the region. And then we had Iranian military directly issuing warnings that if anyone is meddling or anyone is going against the country. So it's actually a boiling pot in Iran right now. And issues with OPEC, geopolitics, Rad already discussed. OPEC is obviously looking into market. They try to stabilize the market, but Biden administration is framing that as a political decision, the rift between Washington and Saudi, at least over this current OPEC. So OPEC decision, we have the Russian war going on. There could be big consequences, not just the recession and food security that we have.
Obviously, the Chinese just had their the Communist Party Congress every 5 years. President Xi was essentially coronated as King of China, and for the foreseeable future, surrounded by his very supportive group of allies, and as was indicated, sustaining the lockdown piece. What did you hear in this Congress? What do you take away from it, and what does it mean, do you think, for oil demand, economic growth, and also the relationship with the West? Your thoughts?
So I think two things that, if I just want to focus on China, is where this energy supplies to China and the change of energy flow in general, that how Russia started exporting more gas to China through Power of Siberia. We have more of Russian oil going to Asia, to China and India. So where the supply is coming to China, that's something that is area that I like to focus. And the other area which has a huge impact and could have a huge impact on the oil market is China's COVID policy. So that's what I kind of sometimes I fear is like a Chinese Trojan horse, because we don't know when China would come out of that COVID policy and when we're going to have that massive demand, additional demand, Chinese demand coming to the market, because that's a huge uncertainty. We know that, I mean, how much oil supplies could be, how OPEC could decide where the supply goes is more or less certain somehow, but no one knows when and how much Chinese demand is going to change when they're coming out of COVID policy. And I think that uncertainty could have consequences for financial markets, for politicians, for oil market, for food security, for energy security. What if China decides that they want to come out of their COVID policy, let's say a day before US election, or just in December that you mentioned? So this is something that only China knows. So it seems that China has a huge control as a consequence, I don't say intentionally because I can't prove that obviously, but China currently has a huge role in energy market by controlling the demand through that COVID policy. So this is something that it's a huge uncertainty that no one in the world except for China's ruling party or officials know when Chinese demand is coming to the market, and that could have a huge consequences. And because no one is ready for that, I mean, no one knows when and how much. So that's I think